Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us once again. This is the next edition in a series of podcasts by the Alex Group in regards to the world of apprenticeships, looking to break down the barriers and address them. And we are joined once again by our Managing Director of the Alex Group, Bally, Bhogal, and of course, Natalie Rae of Natalie Rae Consultancy. It's fantastic to have you both back with us. Bally, first of all, good for you to join us once again. How are you?
I'm okay, thanks, Vinh. I hope you're well as well. Had a really good summer, and so it's nice to come back out of that period and get straight stuck into this on personal development with my partner in crime, Natalie here. How you doing, Natalie?
Yeah, all good. Once again, really good to be here. Thank you very much. And yeah, keen to sort of unpick this topic. We've talked about this several times, haven't we, Bally? And we know it's sort of a need or an uncharted area or a lack of confidence area for some of our providers. So yeah, really looking forward to this conversation coming up.
Extremely important conversation it is. Thank you again, Natalie. Thank you again, Bally, for joining us again to discuss what the subject matter of today, which is personal development for apprentices. So how do we best prepare someone for the role? How do we develop these apprentices, and what is the expectation on providers to do this? And the discussions on funding, the EIF, the AAF, we're all going to cover that today. So let's start from the basics. Bally, first of all, with yourself. So when we refer to personal development, what exactly are we talking about here?
Yeah, Vinh, a great question and really good one to get started with. So when we talk about personal development in relation to apprentices or indeed any student, really, we're talking about their wider development as a person, just in themselves. So, about developing their personal interests, their future aspirations, what they'd like to do in life, what personality, what traits, what characters, what skills they need to develop to achieve what they want in life. So if we look at the apprenticeship programs per se, they're very much about developing the individual for the world of work, for the world of their actual occupation. So if we look at the accountancy standard, that's very much looking at developing somebody in the role of an accountant, for example. When we talk about personal development, it's all that extracurricular stuff. The kinds of stuff we used to probably do at schools. You might remember things like clubs and lunchtime clubs, things that you could do in sport or games that you could get involved in or little projects, etc. It's all the sort of stuff that you probably would have done outside of your core lesson time. So when we talk about wider development, personal development, in relation to Ofsted, the Education Inspection Framework, we're very much talking about the holistic development of the person, those wider concepts, those issues, those everything about life, everything about communities, everything about the world that we live in, the life that you aspire to live, the goals, aspirations, responsibilities that you need to know as an employee for the future, but equally responsibilities that might come your way as a parent in the future, all that kind of stuff. So what else can we do as providers to develop some of those aspects in those people which are clearly wider and beyond what is required from the apprenticeship program, that they very much signed up and contracted and paid to deliver? I hope that sort of makes sense as a starter for 10.
Okay, definitely makes sense. Thank you, Bally. And when it comes to extracurricular activities, it's becoming more and more difficult for providers to address this, but hopefully this can be addressed in a different fashion to eliminate those barriers. But let's dive into the more rigid aspects of personal development. So Natalie, this is definitely something you're able to address. How does personal development link to the Education Inspection Framework, or the EIF, and the apprenticeship funding rules, as well as the accountability framework?
Thank you, Vinh. Yeah, it's really important to start from that external lens. And as you know, and you've mentioned some there, that we've got in the apprenticeship sector, many sort of external frameworks or guidance or requirements that we have to meet with providers. So when we start unpicking personal development, I think it's really important to see the connectivity of why it exists in and around all of those. So we can and should see connectivity to all the aspects of the external guidance, and that helps us understand its importance, but also how it's already aligned with our requirements and responsibilities as a provider. Some may view this personal development development aspect of apprenticeship provision or educational pathways as an addition, and in many cases it is. But if we can see connectivity to some of our already established practice, things that are working well, our delivery models and some of our external guidance, we can start to see how actually we might be meeting some of those requirements already, or seek opportunity to be able to do so a little bit better moving forward. So within the EIF, the Education Inspection Framework, as I'm sure many listeners will know, personal development has its own grade within that inspection framework. And within that framework and in that guidance, there's clear guidance that outlines the expectations and requirements of what is expected of providers, and then also how within that inspection process that would be graded, viewed and looked into. We also know in relation to the apprenticeship funding rules, the personal development aspect, which also may be known as tutorial in some educational institutions, it isn't a specifically funded element within the apprenticeship funding rules or the apprenticeship programme. So there isn't any sort of clear outline from a sort of a compliance funding point of view that says you have to do X, Y and Z in order to generate money. But we know it's a requirement, a responsibility of ours as providers to deliver that. So within the apprenticeship funding rules, whilst it's not a funded element, it does connect or has the opportunity, as we will discuss today, to align and link to many expectations and aspects of audit and compliance that are set out within the apprenticeship funding rules. The holistic development of the individual in this particular conversation around personal development also has a direct link to many of the key metrics and performance indicators that we know are set out or governed by or monitored through the Apprenticeship Accountability Framework. And where this is done well, not only will it contribute to the apprenticeship experience, their personal and professional development, their impact within their role and their individual progress, but in turn, from a provider perspective, it supports positive improvements and progress across many of those metrics and those performance indicators.
Thank you, Natalie. Just on a side question, do you think providers have enough autonomy in regards to what they can provide related to personal development within these frameworks at all? Or do you think they should be afforded more autonomy in that regard?
I think it depends how you look at it, but it's a really good question. So I think there is guidance, like I've said, or we can find interconnectivity or connection to some of the things that we've just discussed there. There isn't a specific framework that says personal development should look like this in specific detail. They're looking at ways in which that they can evidence through an inspection that there has been that wider development of that individual, but there's no real suggestion of how that should look in from a deliverable point of view or what that programme should look. So with regards to autonomy, I think it's a real opportunity that providers can choose how that is best delivered, how they could look at their current delivery models, their current frameworks and setups of their programmes, looking at the knowledge, skills and behaviours, the criteria that sits within each individual apprenticeship standard. And they can either find ways to sort of align with the activity that's already going on, or the choice to sort of layer upon that. In how they deliver it, we'd like to see, so it's not additional work, as much embedding into the current practice as possible. You do have the opportunity in some really good practices where we've seen people set up a whole specific learning aim on their e-portfolio, for instance, which takes the learner through their personal development or tutorial type programme. Or we've seen some providers work with sort of newsletters and those kind of like monthly bulletins of themes that can sort of initiate conversations within classrooms, within workshops, or one-to-one with their skills coach or tutor. So there's multiple different ways in which people can sort of facilitate this requirement, and that actually does sit with the provider to sort of choose how they best think that that can be covered.
Thank you so much, Natalie. That actually does lead into my next question. How can one determine what's in and what's out within the personal development curriculum? What can they do?
I guess the thing that we have to do here is, I think the baseline is to be able to look at each apprenticeship standard that you're delivering and obviously understand those knowledge, skills and behaviours. And if you've got more than one programme in your offering or across, the sector or the institution, you'll be able to see some of those common themes that link between one apprenticeship standard to the next. Those sort of softer skills of communication, some of those behavioural aspects can really start to create a baseline framework or a starting point for that personal development. But I think in my view, I really see this, I'm really passionate about this being seen as an opportunity for educational practitioners and organisations because we've got an opportunity here to triangulate all the information we get working in different aspects of a provider, all the feedback, whether it's anecdotal or it's data driven, from internal and external sources that tell us the kind of training needs of the sector, of that kind of age group, that kind of demographic, the nation. And it's an opportunity to pull all of that information together and try and drive your direction that you take with the personal development programme based on data-driven or experiential learnings. So I think it's really good to try and determine what the needs are, rather than sort of just starting to choose topics that might be useful or exciting to students. That's where we're really going to see the impact on that individual, both professionally and personally. So a really good way to be able to do that is to ask apprentices, the employers, staff, through all the ways in which we're already engaging with them in our practice, to ask them what they think the specific needs are, what they're curious about, what they're not learning enough about, some of those life skills, some of those communication skills as well, which is regular feedback from employers, and to triangulate those needs and that intelligence to determine the areas or focus or the direction for your programme. It's important also to analyse the role of the apprentice within the wider context of their work setting and their life, to see if there are any gaps that can be filled by personal development. So again, it's just about consolidating all the information we do have access to across different roles and external sources, and be able to sort of pull that together to be able to form some template. Apprenticeship programmes are typically longer than an academic year or an annual year. So we do need to be able to see that we can see the differentiation of levels when it comes to this, with regards to being able to put in place something different from a level 2 to a level 3, or for a certain age group and an older age group. And that all of these considerations can start to help build a layering up framework for your personal development programme. It's also probably a good idea to get that kind of determination of what's in and what's out, to undertake a skills scan for personal development around wider topics or themes that may be considered critical. So, for instance, many providers will and should be conducting skills scans around the starting point of an individual within that onboarding enrolment process onto an apprenticeship. And those skills scans will be looking typically at the knowledge, skills and behaviour set out within that apprenticeship standard. But it may be a suggestion that people extend that skills scan to look at those kind of wider needs to be able to get that intelligence to drive forward. So where is someone with their knowledge and confidence around managing personal finance, managing their health, fitness and well-being, the confidence or understanding around how to be at work and contribute to a safe working environment, or in their home environment, knowing your rights and responsibilities as an employee, understanding good work ethic, are just some of those things that you could sort of extend that early skills scan to establish individual and then wider needs for your provision.
Natalie, if there ever was a time where you strongly enforced the importance of data-driven decisions, I think that was it, as you've done so before, but I'm sure every listener is going to once again be reminded of how important that is, whether it be through skills scans or whichever method there is to acquire that data, whether it be an order or benchmarking, whichever. But thank you again for that. That's been extremely informative. Bally, I wanted to bring you in now. The next question would be, in your opinion, how is the personal development curriculum different to the course or apprenticeship curriculum as outlined within the standard? What do you think?
Yeah, I've been listening very carefully to Natalie, and Natalie's articulated all of that really well. And I think you can start to see some of the differentiation between the personal development or a curriculum. If you develop a curriculum for personal development versus the curriculum that you develop for the actual apprenticeship or the job related sort of curriculum. And let's not forget that the apprenticeship is very much related to and aligned to a job. So it is going to be very prescriptive around developing occupational competence for that job. So obviously providers are looking to develop the skills, knowledge and behaviours of that individual so that they are perfect to undertake that job, that role. We obviously know, as Natalie's already mentioned, that there's no requirement, there's no set prescribed criteria anywhere that says you must do this, you must do that to develop apprentices wider than this vocational element, this element, all this stuff that we expect you to teach for them to be competent and confident in their role. There's none of that for personal development. However, what we do see is perhaps where there's some overlap, it's in that section around behaviours. So Natalie's mentioned some of those behaviours: communication skills, team working, leadership, organisation, decision making, that kind of stuff, planning. When we see those sorts of behaviours and they're in an apprenticeship standard, there's no reason to believe why you wouldn't need those behaviours in your life as a person, as an individual. So I think you can be quite confident as a provider and creative that actually this area is not only going to develop the person for that job, developing these skills is also going to be particularly useful for this individual to develop them in their wider life and prepare them for the future, frankly. So I think if the providers were looking to differentiate, and how actually do they differentiate, but where is there some overlap between a personal development curriculum and also the curriculum as outlined within the standard, that's where they need to look. And I would put the magnifying glass there as a starter for 10. But, you know, we do expect safety and safeguarding to be taught. It needs to be a taught element. People need to know how to keep themselves safe and how to protect themselves from harm, and also their loved ones, as well as their colleagues at work, school, all the rest of it. That's how we make ourselves a safer society overall. So there's that element. And then also working, living in modern Britain, life in Britain, all that kind of stuff. There are certain aspects that providers know and they resonate with, that actually if we do these 4 or 5 things, we've covered it. But actually there's a lot more that they can do. So hopefully once we start to go a little bit more into that detail, we can provide a bit more of that kind of oversight and how it can actually count towards the standard and that funded element as well, off the job training.
Thank you, Bally. Fantastic information as always. Natalie, was there anything you wanted to add to that at all to address the question?
Only just to think exactly, there's overlap, there's opportunity here, and it is something that sits outside of it. But as Bally's mentioned, or we've alluded to across this conversation already, where best we can see that that's just an extension of the current curriculum rather than an additional programme is probably where it's going to be favourable for providers to deliver. But I guess what I would say when underpicking either a review of your current personal development tutorial aspects of a provision, or really thinking about trying to really do this well over this next contract year, it's probably really good practice to try and identify what those current issues are, maybe locally or nationally, and be responsive to that as well. So, for example, there could be, I'd hate it, but there could be knife crime in an area, or there could be a crime issue, or there could have been an event that took place in that particular region. And it's an opportunity to say, well, actually, how can we help our apprentices of all ages learn about that subject matter even more? So we can look at those personal individual aspects of, as Bally mentioned in the very beginning in the introduction, about that development of that person as an individual, preparing them for life, work and sort of continuation after their apprenticeship programme. But I think it's a real opportunity as well to sort of maybe bring in some of those current affairs, those themes, those kind of things that are in the news, good and bad, to use that as an opportunity to educate the nation through these programmes as well.
Fantastic, thank you so much. Now, that does lead into my next question, which is definitely an important one, and it's talking about Ofsted. So, Natalie, what is Ofsted looking for in relation to the personal development theme exactly?
Okay, so to start us off, to take directly from the Education Inspection Framework, because it is set out clearly there for people and it does give us a clear summary overview, they describe it as the personal development is the curriculum that should support learners to develop their knowledge and skills beyond the purely academic, technical or vocation, which is I'm very much sure what we've been trying to get across already. This judgment evaluates the provider's intent to provide for the personal development of learners and the quality of the way in which it does this. And then the particular guidance goes on to sort of say some summary and some more detailed answers around some of those categories. So they go on to say developing responsible, respectful and active citizens. The equality of opportunity is a part of the conversation that's needed to be able to promote an inclusive environment. developing learners' character, their confidence, resilience and knowledge so that they can keep themselves mentally healthy. It also talks about physical health and an active lifestyle. It talks about sex education and kind of relationship management. And I know there's some more points on that to come in some best practice later. Providing an effective careers programme, so that advice and guidance around sort of developing in their future pathways and progression, and supporting readiness for the next phase of education. So there's a summary there of some of the really clear aspects of personal development that are set out by Ofsted in the inspection framework. And again, it's just a real opportunity to be able to sort of tackle that or cater for that or facilitate learning around those in whichever way a provider feels best to do so. And I think, again, just to reiterate the point of establishing or implementing what they've established as needs coming through from data, experience or intelligence. But again, another lens looking at the Ofsted guidance or their expectations around personal development. It's a really worthwhile exercise to look at some of recent feedback on Ofsted reports where some of the developmental feedback given after inspection either directly or indirectly relates to the personal development programme. And this can then start to paint a picture of those needs and the expectations that they're looking for. So I did a bit of research around some recent Ofsted inspection reports, and these are all fairly recent reports, those with the grading of requires improvement, and just a few points that I've said there that link to personal development. So one feedback or developmental action on a report said, ensure all apprentices receive detailed careers, education, information, advice and guidance about the progression opportunities available to them in their workplace. Another said, make sure that learners follow a personal development curriculum that includes effective careers, advice and guidance. So a lot on careers there and future pathways and next steps. Another development action was implement an appropriately planned personal development curriculum. Another, ensure that apprentices benefit from a wider curriculum that extends beyond their apprenticeship. And finally, offer a broad and well-planned personal development curriculum that teaches apprentices around a range of topics, including fundamental British values, and provides them with a broad and impartial careers advice and guidance. So we can see some connectivity from some of those individual comments across individual reports, certainly some relation to the points that Bally and I have started to make on this. But I think it also raises the profile of this conversation. Why it is worthwhile having is that we can still see in recent reports that this is an area of apprenticeship provision and delivery that across the nation in many aspects does need to have investment into it and development.
Amazing, Natalie. Thank you so much. There is more to it, I believe. Bally, I wanted to bring you in again. Do you have anything to add in regards to what Ofsted is looking for in relation to the personal development theme at all?
It's really interesting because whilst we said at the start of this podcast, there's no framework and there is no prescribed sort of framework. I mean, if you like, providers are able to go off and create and be really creative about how they wish to develop apprentices and their wider kind of, personalities, traits, all the rest of it, obviously having done a skill scan, etc. But then here we are saying that actually in the education inspection framework, they have given some bullet points, they have given some sort of outliners and some themes, if you like, that you can develop individuals around, as Natalie's just mentioned. And there's a lot there. It's not a small amount either, equal opportunities, inclusive environments, developing characters, resilience, all of this stuff. You can't achieve all of that overnight either. So it's not quick. It's not instantaneous. It is, a bit of a labour of love. And I think it has to be planned well. So whilst, what we don't want to do is say that there's nothing out. There certainly are pointers out there, and they are there in the guidance documents that go with and handbooks and things like that, that you'll see for Ofsted inspections, the EIF frameworks, etc. But nothing is prescribed. It is very much guidance. It is very much topic and themes that could be attacked. What I found interesting from your research, Natalie, that you've just gone off and done and came back with some recent reports, is actually how many of them say that, you need to develop your curriculum, basically your teachings around careers guidance and what's the next step and where are you going to end up in the future? What are you thinking? What are your goals, aspirations, and the next step? I mean, that just seems to come out time and time again, almost as if, shouldn't say, but it almost gives you the impression that have they been mandated to say that in every case, or actually is it a case that it is coming up sporadically and randomly, but it just happened to be frequent in the latest set of reports? So that's just interesting, bit of an observation from my end as Natalie was going through that. So I think that's probably what I'd add currently at the moment.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Bally. Now, Bally, again to yourself, the next question would be, can personal development training contribute towards off-the-job training hours or not? What's the answer?
Yeah, I would say yes. So being an auditor, being a obviously consultant, trainer, critical friend to the sector as well, I would say yeah, but certainly not in every case. So you have to proceed with care. So if you think about off-the-job training hours, obviously off-the-job training hours can count towards developing the individual, developing their behaviours, obviously their knowledge and skills towards achieving that occupational competence. But as we've said earlier in this podcast, there are certain elements that are behaviorally linked, and that's where we can really look and zoom in and say, okay, well, how does this look to developing the wider person? And I was looking at the Baker standard, because you guys both know I love cakes, right? So I was looking at the level 2 Baker standard, and I saw in there that actually just one of the behaviors is seeks learning and development opportunities. That is it. It just simply states seeks learning and development opportunities. So you just think to yourself as a provider, wow, if that is something that we have to develop in this individual, what are we teaching them? We're actually teaching this individual, okay, look, when you're looking to learn and develop and you're looking for further development opportunities, what actually can you do? What is this skill? How would you need to develop that? So, you could look at things like, doing reflections on yourself, doing self-evaluation, using that kind of reflective practice that I've done something, I just want to stand back, I just want to look at that, I want to review it, assess and judge for myself, how did it go, could I have done that any better, what have I learned from it? So there's a lot of self-analysis, self-evaluation, reflective practice that you can do as an individual. And then if you look at outcomes, where would I take that next? Well, actually, there's certain activities that I can do to improve myself in that area. I can do projects, I could get involved in extra challenges, pick up additional tasks at work, maybe go to my line manager and ask for extra work or extra activities that really would help me to develop this behavior even more. So I could do stuff outside of work that helps me to develop this behavior that is listed within the standard. I could do stuff within work. I could get involved in voluntary projects. It's whatever it takes to kind of push those boundaries, and a challenge really to grow from. There's loads of examples of this and we can give this later, but the biggest thing with this and the caveat is that whilst behavioural elements, or even sometimes knowledge elements, can definitely contribute to off-the-job training hours, it's not a blanket kind of, just include everything that you see here in terms of behaviours as part of those off-the-job hours and quantify that so that it enables you to A, get your off-the-job training hours, but B, claim funding for it. That's where you have to be really, really careful. And you have to be absolutely meticulous in the way that you plan personal development curriculum and that overlap in terms of is this in or is this out for off-the-job training hours. If you are audited for that, you have to be very careful in terms of, does this fit the bill or does it not? Is it claimable activity for getting paid for what we do, or is it not? And not everything counts towards off-the-job training hours, or even that, your claims, if you like. So providers just need to be really careful about that overlap and being careful that, personal development curriculum, that the curriculum is mapped to the standard and that, you are very clear about where it's valid and where it's legitimate to claim that as off-the-job training hours. Hopefully we can give you some examples as well going forward.
I'm actually hoping for some examples exactly, Bally, but I would challenge any apprenticeship leader whether any of them actually don't like baking or cake. I'd anticipate.
I'm always first in the queue for that, Vinh. You know that. Both of you guys know that. So you can bribe me with cake, but only with a small b.
Who in their right mind wouldn't love cake? But moving on. Let's hear some examples. Natalie, let's go back to you first and foremost. Do you have any good practice or examples that you can share around these themes that have been covered by providers already within personal development at all?
Yeah, I think, Vinh, it's just an extension of some of the things we've touched on before, where there's a link to demand or need for certain skills or certain topics and understanding coming through from the sector, or people can use labour market intelligence about some of those soft skills that aren't coming through when employers report back to the sector through skills analysis. It's about sort of identifying some of those. There's some good practices where there is that triangulation of evidence or feedback or direction, and people actually using that and pulling that together into their content. Now, we work across, Bally and I, across multiple different provider types in the work that we do. But if you take a slightly more academic setup, for instance, like for example, like a college, a lot of college practice more need to do it, but because the typical educational pathways that sit within inside a college that are non-apprenticeship require that tutorial aspect. So students that might be attending Monday through Friday would have a tutorial session, and there's a curriculum plan or a delivery model outlined for what that tutorial will be. You can see sometimes when providers are delivering apprenticeships as well, that there's actually connectivity around the same sort of approach. Now, harder to deliver in the same way because the attendance and contact time with apprenticeships with any provider type is more difficult, but that whole principle can sometimes be upped, slightly adapted and landed into apprenticeship delivery. So it's taking that kind of approach of what's driving those tutorial conversation, obviously making them age and work appropriate, and trying to drive that kind of personal holistic development of a person through the personal development programme through that as well. So the themes are coming through from what they're seeing, what they're being told, what the sector tells us, what the labour market tells us, and unfortunately what the news might tell us, and being driven by those real core needs and knowledge and skills requirements to be able to cascade through the apprenticeship provision.
Thank you. Bally, to yourself, do you have any good practice or examples at all?
Yeah, I'll mention some specific ones as well. I mean, Natalie's bang on the money with what she's just said. Really, I get super excited by listening to some of my providers tell me what they're doing when we're doing our work with them. So I'm just going to pick out some ones that are kind of at the forefront of my mind. So like outdoorsy activities and challenges. So these have been an engineering standard. So one of our providers, who is Ofsted Outstanding, by the way, they send their apprentices out for outdoor challenges, and obviously they pay for that activity. A lot of what the activity is, all the activity that kind of almost is undertaken there builds on the behaviours, so related directly to the behaviours within that standard, building communication skills, leadership, decision making, working in teams, team working, organisational skills, that kind of stuff. So really good to see kind of an outdoorsy example that maps across to the standard. I went to a provider once and they do welding, so they do the welding apprenticeship. I think there's a level 3 apprenticeship, and actually as I was walking through their offices, they said, oh, by the way, the metal staircase that you're walking on and the handrail that you're holding, it's been developed by our apprentices, and that's been part of the project work that they've had to do, that actually whatever they make, we use it and we apply it, and we try and give them actual projects that the output we use. And also they made, like, from scraps and leftovers of metal, they made like a metal dog, I think from memory, it was definitely an animal, and they donated it, and that was erected somewhere in the middle of a roundabout up north somewhere, and I found that super exciting. I was like so excited by that. I thought it was brilliant, just class it was, and brilliant to see that the building you're actually walking in was made by the apprentices as part of their apprenticeship program as well. I run an AAG group, so they are a group of providers that we work with as part of a network, and they were telling me that one of the providers, that as part of their enrichment activities for their apprentices, they partnered with the NHS, who happened to just be in the same building as their location. So they've partnered with one of their neighbours in the building who happens to be the NHS, to give sexual advice and give a clinic on that and information to their apprentices. And just because they've got that synergy there in terms of they are in the same building, so they're leveraging their contacts, their networks, just by proximity of location. So there's an example where there's synergy and you can leverage your contacts, your networks as a provider. One that I'm super excited about always is health and fitness, kind of walks and talks, exercise, just moving around, lessons. There's a lot of schools that are moving towards movement theory as well, and practice, and so just lessons are around keeping people moving, keeping youngsters moving as well in those lessons. But what we have seen is definitely walks and talks. This was especially during COVID, so having catch-up sessions whilst on the go, motivating apprentices to move, getting involved also in like sports to develop their leadership, their communication skills, and that is very transferable to the apprenticeship. So I'm always up for that, as you guys know as well. And safety talks as well. So safety talks by local police, that's always been one that comes up quite frequently. Money matters, we mentioned financial talks. So one of our providers, they use the content that's already developed by Barclays Bank, really rate it as well, and said that, you know, all providers should be using this money matters and talks content. It's already out there, it's readily available, and it's really good quality. We've seen a rise in autism and individuals on the spectrum. So there's a lot more of this kind of autism awareness talks that external agencies are being brought in. And so not only development for staff within apprenticeship settings and providers, but also for learners as well. We know that World Skills was in the news this morning. Obviously, that's a big challenge and competition, but actually we have a hairdresser within our AAG, our collaboration group, and what they do is with all of their salons, they run a competition between all their salons. They've got prizes, they give out hair products and styling equipment, and it all just becomes really rah-rah between the apprentices. So again, super exciting just to have those competitions between clients. I mean, that's just class. I thought it's a great idea. So yeah, not, you know, some of that might not be necessarily related to the apprenticeship, but you can see what it does. It just raises the game and raises the standard and raises the expectation, and that competitive nature between apprentices to strive for more and that get that excellence. So I love that. Health and fitness, we've also talked about sort of goal theory, motivation, training, practice. There's a lot of synergy between sports psychology and what we do as individuals at work. And then two areas that I want to speak about specifically that I was involved in as an apprentice manager, mentor when I was employed. It was a training, well, it was a training provider, and I had a number of apprentices. This whole area about how to write formal letters and emails. So I delivered some training myself. So not necessarily part of the standard, but it's definitely one that you can use in your wider development as an individual for writing letters to, for example, NHS, insurance companies, letters of complaints, that kind of stuff, but how you write formal letters and emails. So I remember giving a half a day session to about 8 or 9 apprentices at work, going back some years. And then there's also the Braithwaite Challenge. Don't know if they do that anymore, but again, it's very much an outdoorsy challenge. I was the apprentice mentor for a team of 9 or 10 of my apprentices who won joint second. By the way, there was a competition. They had to do volunteering, they had to do presentations, they had to fundraise, they had to go out there and speak to lots of different companies to fundraise, but also arrange fundraising efforts and activities to raise money. All of it went towards helping disadvantaged students from disadvantaged backgrounds to develop their education more. So what wasn't there to like? Outdoorsy activities, leadership, volunteering, planning, presentation skills. It was just amazing for developing apprentices, and I literally was just gobsmacked with how my group of apprentices 10 years ago, how much they learnt from that. It was kind of over about 6 to 9 months, but it was an extra bolt on, but there was a lot of overlap with their apprenticeship that they were doing, and also what was required as part of that challenge to be involved in that, and also to win it joint second. I was really proud of them. So hopefully some of those examples give a bit of an idea about, these are just great examples for developing the person individually.
I completely agree. Fantastic examples. Some examples, real life examples from there. That leads into my final question. Let's finish up. So we've already provided some examples which providers have already given to us. We've outlined the context in regards to Ofsted, what they think about personal development too. So for the benefit of our listeners, once again, let's look into some solutions. Natalie, I wanted to ask you first and foremost, how can providers excel at delivering this personal development curriculum and overcome any challenges around it? Let's give them some answers.
Yeah, thank you, Vinh, and thank you, Bally. I think this naturally moves on quite nicely from the examples that Bally's given there. I think it's just to reflect on the examples that Bally's talked through at length. It's happening out there. There's some really good practice. Some people don't really know that it links to this or that they can access things. I think the mention of things like Barclays life skills and stuff like that, there's content out there, there's people out there, there's organisations maybe down the corridor in an office block, like Bally mentioned, that could be involved. So the information and the knowledge and capability or competence of specific areas around some of the themes that providers identify can exist. It isn't necessarily a startup design and development and creation requirement here. It could more so be the kind of consolidation of that information, the direction, what's available, those resources, and then the coordination of that learning or that involvement. So I think it's about using connections and the contacts that people have, any established partnerships, or even using employers, apprentices and staff to be involved in that tutorial personal development aspect as well. Because I think if every provider looked at what was available to them without having to start anything from scratch, they could really paint and create quite a really healthy, contributing and impactful personal development with the resources and skills and connections that they've already got. But I'd also want to ensure that, and with that in mind, we need to make sure that we ensure that aspects of the personal development are embedded within the apprenticeship curriculum and delivery through integrated streams of working and training plans. So what we mean by that is ensure that it's not considered or treated as an additional task or aspect, but align it with the connectivity and the connections that already exist within your curriculum, your contacts, your stakeholders and your delivery plan. Another example would be to identify and implement connection to the aspects of the apprenticeship journey, for example. So we know that the apprenticeship journey from start to finish is made up of key components like initial assessment, the skills scan, careers information, advice and guidance, personal and professional development plans, smart targets, you name it. All of those things can start to also shape the way in which it is implemented. So we've got the curriculum content coming through from some of those ideas, examples and our contacts, but how it's sort of then filtered and brought within alignment into that apprenticeship programme is sort of identifying opportunities throughout the apprenticeship that this can link to. So for instance, monitor the progress against aspirational targets within reflective practice opportunities, and obviously the coordination of that personal development monitored through progress reviews as we would expect for the other components of the apprenticeship. And then consider topics of the month to be cascaded to apprentices, staff and employers. So any of those themes, any of those reflections or any of that content to be shared amongst more stakeholders than just the apprentices. And see this task at hand as an opportunity to develop the wider skills, knowledge and behaviours of all stakeholders. And I think a really good example, or again, going back to the word I've used a couple of times here, the opportunity to be able to share that information to parents as well, where age appropriate. I appreciate that's not required, but if we're working with younger groups of apprenticeships, in different formats where there is some parental involvement or they could benefit from parental involvement, engagement, then sometimes that opportunity to cascade that information, what we've got here is an opportunity to ensure that we are facilitating conversations that need to be had. And that's really exciting. So to be able to look at it through that lens as well is try and think about who else could be involved to continue those discussions, have impact professionally and personally, but can also learn from the programme as well.
Thank you so much, Natalie. And let's finish off. Bally, I know you have some thoughts on this as well. Same question to you. How can providers excel at delivering that personal development curriculum?
Yeah, I just want to finish off by saying that I think the real big challenge with personal development is just where to start. So if you've got a blank sheet of paper, is where to start. But hopefully we've given you some ideas, and there's content out there. Natalie's mentioned that there's loads of contents. I think that's part of the problem as well, in that you can get overwhelmed by tons of content available. But I think you do have to think creatively and just not rush into it. Don't think any old content either, just because it's out there. You know, if you've done your sort of training needs assessment up front, your skills scan as we call it, or initial assessments, all of that sort of stuff, you know, whatever the terminology, if you've really looked at your cohorts, individuals within it, you've looked at the programs, you've looked at past, present, future, things will change, and you can make those tweaks to your curriculum for personal development as you go. But I think the big thing is just to be creative, not to rush into it, and just don't use any old content. You have to make it enjoyable. I think your trainers have to be excited about it as well. Like, sometimes providers just play safe. You know, they'll deliver the British values, prevent, safeguarding. Natalie mentioned earlier, don't make it so that it's like a sore thumb. It looks like a bolt-on. And frankly, in too many cases, probably 95% of the cases, certainly with the providers I've worked in all my life in this sector, they will stick to these safe zones, which are British values, prevent, safeguarding, because I think that's definitely going to come up in an Ofsted inspection. We want to go over these things. But actually, if you think about apprentices, if you think about people, forget about apprentices, just if you just think about people, what interests them more these days? And actually what interests them are those topical, those interesting areas where they can have a good quality discussion and debate around things such as climate change, human rights, work, life, where they see themselves going in the future, what they want to do, future direction, education, how to get there, how to create those pathways, how to create relationships with people, you know, how to deal with letdowns and their weaknesses, how to develop weaknesses, you know, how to build on their strengths, their hobbies, their interests, all that sort of stuff. Nowadays, sort of arts, culture, that sort of stuff comes into it. Sports is a big one nowadays. You know, just travel is big. Yeah, money is big, especially nowadays. So many topics that mean so much to individuals. Actually, we have a provider who has now started to make their apprentices a chair every month, and they swap them and they say every month we'll talk about a different topic. The next apprentice will be the chair of that topic. You'll come in with a topic that is of interest, that's topical, and you'll lead the discussion, come in with some research, what the topic is about, and then everybody will get involved. And that's how they've got their apprentices involved in different themes, different areas of interest and topical issues that we see time and time again, but over and above. So just think beyond British values, prevent and safeguarding, be creative, but also look at areas that really interest the learners, but also that are topical to discuss as well. So hopefully we've given you enough to go at. I certainly feel like I've lessened the load on myself, and it's just nice to get it all out there. I don't know how you're feeling, Natalie, if you feel the same as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think it is an area in the sector that does need development. It needs to, and hopefully we've instilled some confidence that it's not over and above what may already be happening. It just needs to be facilitated in a certain way or consolidated. But I also think, you know, the examples that we've both shared, but particularly Bally, some of the specific examples, there's some incredible practice out there where people are thinking quite creatively and innovatively and really bringing apprentices inside, you know, as a huge part of their organisation. That's where we really get the detail and impact here, is that employer engagement as well within the personal development programme. So yeah, hopefully there's some stuff there to sort of identify some of the opportunities, the direction, the guidance, and some best practice examples for people.
I think we've definitely provided more than that. We've provided so much information there, which is going to be beneficial to so many people. Natalie, Bally, thank you so much again for joining us. This has been the podcast addressing personal development for apprentices, and hopefully to everyone listening, it's given you plenty of food for thought. Let's go beyond, let's keep going, and let's do what we can to uplift the apprenticeship sector as a whole. Thank you once again to both of you, and thank you to all the listeners for joining us once again. Take care and join us for the next one. Thank you so much.